Welcome to Beat Diabetes. Today we're going to talk about beta cells, what you need to know in order to conquer diabetes. Well, today we will look at the idea of beta cells. I haven't talked a lot about them thus far, but they are important. In fact, really to have a full understanding of what's going on with your body as you are either diabetic or pre-diabetic or struggling metabolically, you really should know some things about beta cells. So hopefully after today's little talk, you will learn a few things. One of the things that stands out to me in all the different comments that I receive under my videos is how different various diabetics are in terms of how long it takes them to really get a handle on things and get their glucose levels down, in terms of what some can get away with eating and others cannot. There's so many differences. And one of the reasons, probably, well, one of the major reasons would be beta cells. Some people have more than others. Some people have lost more than others. And we're going to talk about that and what is involved with the loss of beta cells. Are they dying? Are they being swallowed up by fat? Have they lost their identity? Well, different people will say each of those things, and we'll take a look at that. Let's start with kind of a working man's definition or a working woman's definition of beta cells. This is by Jenny Rule, whom I respect and enjoy her writing. She says, insulin is produced by special cells called beta cells. These tiny cells are found in structures called the islets of Langerhans, which are scattered throughout your pancreas. The job of the beta cell is to manufacture insulin, store it, and release it into the bloodstream when appropriate. Healthy beta cells are continually making insulin and storing it within the beta cell in the form of tiny granules. So that's what's keeping your blood sugar normal. Now, your body has a thermostat that's going to keep your blood sugar under control and at the proper amount, which is not much at all. It's about a teaspoon for the average adult of sugar that's in your blood. And if you get too much, you've got problems, especially if you're continually in that state. If you have too little, you've got problems as well, and you could even die. So your blood sugar has to stay regulated. And a big part of that regulation has to do with the pancreas that can release insulin to bring glucose down. So the insulin is being produced by some tiny little cells called beta cells. And generally, if you've got diabetes or if you're headed that direction, you've got one of two problems, or maybe both. Insulin resistance, which means your body doesn't process insulin very well, and beta cell issues, which means you're not producing much insulin. Now, for many type 2 diabetics, they're producing a lot of insulin, at least at the beginning, and then they begin to lose it as time goes on. For a type 1, you're producing no insulin at all, or virtually none. Now, here's a quote that I've heard several times, people who say that at the point that you get diagnosed as being a type 2 diabetic, around 50% of your beta cell function has been lost. That's pretty depressing. And I'm not sure that's exactly right. I mean, I'm no researcher, but if you've lost 50% of your beta cell function, that is a whole lot, and it's a wonder you're doing anything much at all in terms of controlling your glucose. Now, one of the quick indicators of where you stand in terms of beta cell function has to do with whether your diabetes is causing you to gain weight or lose weight. If you're gaining weight and you're getting heavier and heavier, it's probably because you've got fine beta cell function and your pancreas is producing lots of insulin, and insulin will cause you to gain weight. But there are some diabetics that go just the opposite direction. They lose weight and they can't understand it, and they're getting skinnier and skinnier. And generally, that can be an indication that their beta cell function has ceased to work very well. They've probably had some death or dysfunction of their beta cells. So if you only have about 50% of the beta cells that you started with as an adult, when you're born, your beta cells increase and they multiply, but by the time you're 2, they're pretty much hitting where they're supposed to be, and they'll pretty much stay that way. They'll grow a little bit throughout your childhood. By the time you're 20, they're pretty much set as long as you don't do anything to mess them up. But if you've lost 50% of your beta cells, you are at a definite disadvantage to keep your glucose in line. It would be like running a 10K race and you're carrying a bag of bricks on your back. You cannot possibly keep up with all the other runners. No one should blame you for coming in dead last because you're the only one carrying a big old sack of bricks on your back. And when you've lost half your beta cells, there's no way you can keep up with keeping your glucose in line, which means all kinds of physical and health miseries are going to be coming your way. Well, we've got a bunch of quotes. One of the issues with beta cells, and the truth is there's controversy to this day about it, and that is what exactly is happening to them when they stop working. Are they just flat out dying? And some say they are. Or is it because they've been swallowed up by all the fat in your pancreas and they just don't work anymore? And if you could somehow get your pancreas lean and mean, they'll start working again, which is what Dr. Jason Fung has to say. Let me quote from his book, The Diabetes Code. He says, first, beta cell function has been proven to be fully reversible. Well, I hope he's right. I don't know. I've read enough and looked at enough of the quotes and the research papers and stuff that I'm not sure that it's settled yet. But he says beta cell function has been proven to be fully reversible. Dr. Roy Taylor of Newcastle University in UK demonstrated pancreatic function recovery with an ultra-low-calorie diet. The fact that weight loss can reverse type 2 diabetes also implies reversibility to the beta cell function. Simply, the beta cells are not burnt out. And he goes on to say, both in this book and in some of his talks that I've heard, that he feels they've just become dysfunctional. They're not burned out, they're not dead, but they're just not working. And the reason, according to him, is because your pancreas is loaded with fat. Again, we should all hope he's right on that, because that gives tremendous encouragement to people that are not producing much insulin. Now, if you're a type 1, almost certainly your pancreatic beta cells are dead. Now, here is an article that is written in conjunction with Dr. Yoshifumi Saisho. This is from the researchoutreach.org website. And it says the process by which beta cell mass might be lost is not clear. Exactly what I was just saying. It's not certain. But Professor Saisho proposes a beta cell workload hypothesis, which suggests that overwork could cause dysfunction in beta cells. In an obese patient, beta cells are required to produce large amounts of insulin to trigger the absorption of the high glucose intake. Body tissues may then develop insulin resistance, and so the beta cells have to work even harder to produce enough insulin to trigger glucose absorption. This overwork, that is, you're taxing your poor beta cells, your poor pancreas too much. This overwork could cause some beta cells to become impaired or die, which then puts even further stress on the remaining cells. And so as more beta cells die, the workload on the remaining cells increases, creating a downwards spiral of beta cell function/mass. So what they're saying here is that you can work your poor beta cells so hard, some of them just die out. And the more die or become dysfunctional, the more the others have to work harder to keep up. Let me give you my own little Dennis Pollock illustration along these lines. Imagine a factory that has 100 workers in it, and those 100 workers are expected to produce 5,000 widgets every day. So every day, the 100 workers come to the factory, they do their jobs, and at the end of the day, 5,000 widgets are produced. But the factory owner says to himself, I don't need all these workers. I think we can get by dropping our workforce 25%. So instead of 100 workers, he now has 75 workers. He's fired 25 of his workers. There's only 75, but he still expects them to maintain producing 5,000 widgets a day. Well, you're asking 75 people to do what 100 people used to do. And so they're going to have to come in earlier, they're going to have to stay later, they're going to have to work harder, they're going to sweat, they're going to huff, they're going to puff, they'll try to keep up with the load that was previously done with 100 workers. But this factory owner becomes more and more greedy, and he says, we don't even need 75. I think we can make do with 50. So he fires 25 more. And now you've got 50 workers trying to do the work that used to be done by 100 workers, but still he expects 5,000 a day. Well, after a while, some of these workers, they can't handle all the pressure and all the work and the extra hours, so some of them quit. And now you're down to 25 workers, but he still insists 5,000 widgets a day, but you can't keep up. So even though your boss is saying, we got to make those same 5,000 widgets, the reality is they can't possibly do it, and now they're producing 2,000 widgets, 1,000 widgets, and even more are quitting because they're fed up with all the pressure until finally you're down to 5 workers, and they're producing about 50 widgets a day. That's all he can do. And the factory owner looks back at the good old days when he had 100 workers producing 5,000 widgets every day. Now he's down to 5 producing 50. He says, man, I should have never fired those workers. Well, that's kind of how it is with your pancreas. You've got these little beta cells scattered around your pancreas, doing all the heavy lifting, producing the insulin so that it can take care of all the glucose that you take into your body. And if you mistreat them and overwork them by eating way too many carbohydrates and way too much sugar, and you're just overweight and you're eating too much, period, you're gonna kill some of them. You're gonna make some of them dysfunctional, and all the ones that are left are gonna have to work harder. Some of them are gonna quit. Some of them are gonna have to do without, or you'll have to do without, and it's just gonna be a downward spiral. In this article about Dr. Yoshifumu Saisho's work, it says when insulin production drops too far and glucose levels become too high, then the patient is diagnosed with diabetes. And at this point, the beta cells may also be at risk from the toxicity of hyperglycemia, which is high glucose, causing even further decreases in beta cell mass. After a type 2 diagnosis, a patient will continue to lose around 5% of their beta cell function each year. Now, folks, that's 50% in 10 years. That means if you're diagnosed at age 48, according to this, if you're diagnosed at age 48, 10 years later, when you're 58, you will have lost 50% of your beta cells if you don't make some serious changes. Jenny Rule writes, high blood sugar itself is toxic to beta cells. Rewind, let's say it again. High blood sugar itself is toxic to beta cells, a phenomenon called glucose toxicity. As your blood sugar rises, for whatever reason, it causes further damage to your beta cells, which makes your second phase insulin release even less able to lower your blood sugar. And really what this explains is, if you're killing off your beta cells by eating high carb and having high glucose and high insulin levels, you could end up a type 1 diabetic eventually. And one of the things that we're seeing these days is the phenomenon called LADA, L-A-D-A, which stands for latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. And it's kind of like a sliding progression from a type 2 diabetic to a type 1 diabetic. It doesn't happen quickly like the childhood type 1 diabetes. That will hit hard and fast, and you'll go from normal to type 1 in, I don't know, a few weeks perhaps, or a month or two. With this LADA, L-A-D-A, it's going to be slower than that, but you're going to be moving almost irresistibly toward type 1. You're headed for the precipice. You're headed for destruction. And you're losing beta cells constantly, and that's the last thing you want to do. What can we take home from this? Well, let me just give you 4 points or 5 points that I just jotted down quickly that relate to this subject of beta cells. First of all, as you research, as you read what different people have to say about it all, there's a lot we have to learn. We don't know it all, and there's still some controversy out there about why beta cells do die. There's some that talk about beta cell identification or a beta cell identity, and they're saying, well, they don't die, but what they do is they change identity, and they're still cells, but they don't produce much insulin anymore, or none. So there's a lot we have to learn. In 200 years from now, I think we'll have it all figured out, but none of us will be around to profit by that. So we have to take preemptive action. We can't wait 200 years for the experts to do enough studies and enough research to figure it all out. We have to act now. Second point, a state of constantly high glucose is not only harmful in all the areas we always talk about, the eyes, the kidneys, the circulation, various organs, and so forth. It is harmful and it is destructive of beta cells. It is a toxic situation. You were having problems 10 years ago, 15 years ago. If you had known enough and you had done enough research on your own body, you would have figured out, hey, I'm headed this way. But most people don't. They live in blissful ignorance and they don't know. They're 25 years old. They feel great. The doc says your A1C is 5 point something. They don't see any problems. You need to start being careful right now. Don't wait until you're 48 and the doc says to you, you've got diabetes and perhaps you've lost 50% of your beta cells already. Don't wait for that point. So the earlier you intervene in changing the lifestyle factors that brought you to the brink of destruction, the better your chances are to see victory. And often it can be a pretty quick victory. Don't wait until it's late. You can still win, but it's going to be longer. It's going to be tougher. And plus you may have some damage that's already been done that you cannot reverse. So beat it as fast as you can. Fourth point I want to make is the best thing you can do for your beta cells, for your pancreas, for your body in general. Once again, those two favorite themes that I hit on all the time, a low-carb diet, call it keto, call it low-carb, I don't care. You just don't eat a lot of carbs. And a time-restricted eating with an occasional fasting thrown in if your doctor allows you. But basically, low-carb eating and some low-carb diet, time-restricted eating, protect those beta cells. If high glucose as a result of high carbs is toxic to your body and deadly to your beta cells, then low-carb, low insulin, and low glucose is going to be healing to your body. The fifth point I want to make is even if you have suffered a lot of beta cell loss. Let's say your doctor does an insulin test and says, well, my friend, you're just not producing much insulin. Maybe you have to inject insulin. Maybe you have to take some medication. The one thing you can do is do low carb so you don't have to take very much insulin. And who knows, according to some of this research, there are pretty good chances you can do better a year from now than you were 5 years back. You can improve your situation. You possibly can revive some of those beta cells and do better than you ever thought you could.